challenges. I still remember coming home from school one afternoon in year 7 to find out that mum and dad had separated. At the age of 12, my brother and I had to help look after mum and her little sister. And I still recall helping mum look for a cheap place to stay when we were forced to move, and we found a small unit in Sydney's inner west. And I still remember coming home from school one afternoon to find out that our electricity had been cut off. So my brother, my little sister and I, we sat in the dark eating instant noodles, uncooked. The next day, mum caught the train over the city and sold whatever jewels she had, and finally, our electricity was back on. Life over those years was tough, but what got us through it all was that we've been taught since a very young age about resilience. That in your life, you're going to get knocked down over and over and over again, but you've got to find a way to pull yourself back up. The person who taught me more about this than anyone else in my life was actually my mum. Let me share with you now a small story about my mum. My mum is a really devout Catholic, but back in Vietnam, when she was 17, she went and she saw this monk. The monk looks at her and says, "Hin, the next 33 years of your life until you turn 50 are going to be really, really challenging. You're going to face every single obstacle imaginable." Mum looks at him and says, "No, I don't believe you." Well, guess what happens? The next 33 years of Mum's life turned out pretty much exactly as how this monk said, and Mum faced a really tough life. And it wasn't until she turned 50 that life got easier for her, and she started to go back to pursue all of her dreams. And a few years ago, Mum goes back to pursue one of her life's greatest dreams, which has been to learn English properly at TAFE. It's always been one of Mum's greatest dreams, to learn English properly at TAFE. So she goes back to learn English, and one day she comes over looking all worried, and I go, "Mum, what's wrong?" She looks at me and she goes, "Qua, today the teacher gave us homework." And she goes, "We all have to write a 500-word story in English." And she goes, "Can you help me?" And I looked at her and I said, "Mum, I want you to try this one yourself." She goes, "Oh, okay." So she walks away, she sits down, and she writes, and she writes, and she writes. And finally, 3 days later, she finishes, and she comes over, and she shows me what she's written. And I read it, and I basically started crying. It was beautiful. Mum had written a 500-word story in English called My Life. And I said, "Mum, you've got to hand this in to your teacher." The next day, she goes to class, she hands it in to her teacher. 2 days after that, she comes over, all excited, going, "Qua, qua, qua, qua." And I said, "Mum, what is it?" And she gives me her story, and on it, the teacher had written 10 out of 10. And I said, "Mum, that's brilliant." And in English, she looks at me and she goes,